Well, today we're going to have a discussion with David Farmer and myself regarding the Netflix documentary film, Waco, an American Apocalypse. And it does raise a lot of questions. Well, Waco is certainly been in the news quite a bit, and Netflix has put together a three-part series about what had happened 30 years ago. The incident started in February of 1993, and it's as newsworthy today as it was back then. The series itself, takes you right from the beginning all the way through the tragic end, and it is very interesting because it has interviews with the small number of survivors that were actually in the house when the incident initially started, and questions are raised. It doesn't have final answers, but probably I think is as good a story telling as I've seen in terms of what really happened and giving the perspective of both sides. You have interviews with the federal agents from both federal agencies that were involved with this tragedy. And as I said, you've got survivors, including one woman who was just, I think, I'm tempted to say 9 years old, but because of what just happened in Nashville, I may not have the right age for her, but was a young child when everything happened, and she is is really almost damaged goods from her own description of herself. David, what was your impression of in terms of real big picture?
Well, also too, it's said that this incident or this extended incident was the largest gunfight on U.S. soil since the Civil War, just for that perspective. And I think they do a good job, especially of the interviews that you discussed, also the never before seen scenes. Some of the stuff that's brand new, because there is a cottage industry in this whole event, has been for a while, going back at least to 2018 when Paramount Plus had a series which is still showing on streaming. So and also, of course, in the news, who had their first rally of the 2025 campaign, but and Waco, Texas, on the day of the event. So it's really it's, as they used to say about grade B movie, B movies, ripped from today's headlines, and it's still a very relevant topic.
Yes, and the actual events as they unfolded, you really get a very complete picture, and the fact that there's such a different perspective between the two sides is partly what's so amazing. Neither side has really changed their viewpoint after all these years. The one FBI agent from that I forget the title of his squad, but it was the sharpshooter. He's aged, but he's still a pretty scary individual. Yeah. Talking about what occurred, yeah. And you don't in terms of the number of dead. I think that the film uses 86. I've heard some other numbers that are a little bit less, but 86 is probably as good a number as any. 4 of which, of course, were federal agents, and the initial incident, and that's part of the tragedy, is that from all the reports and you listen to both sides, you really get the feeling that if there was this simply a willingness to communicate right at the very beginning, it all could have been avoided. You don't know with David Koresh exactly where he would have done and what he would have done, but there certainly are reports that he did communicate with the town sheriff, and if they had just simply come knocking on the door, at least the FBI agents or the alcohol agents would not have been killed in that initial incident, which really got the whole thing which started the whole thing down a road that it never could really deviate from.
Right, 51 days, that torture. I can remember, Steve, you remember, because we were both in our various practices at that time, but I can remember the coverage, the television coverage, and
wall to wall.
Yeah. And so I remember it very, very vividly, and it makes the documentary even that more compelling to remember what you observed initially. It's so far, the collection of critical reviews has been pretty positive. I always look at Rotten Tomatoes just for giggles, just to see, and it's got last I looked, about an 86% positive, which is not to say it's not without its negative critics as well. And they make some interesting points as well. I think the major one is that it's, the two negatives. One is from Roger Ebert's, of course, he's passed, but so he's not around, but his website still exists, and Nick Allen over there has a extensive review, and also the Guardian had I would say constructively critical, but both of them kind of sound the same theme about the documentary as being as lacking any kind of in-depth. For example, how did the Davidians get there, and and what's the path? I think this is the Guardian comment. What's the path from Waco to January 6th? And I would say,
Pretty direct.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. We take the first part of that in terms of the history of Branch Davidian. Yeah, I don't think most people realize that this was not something that David Koresh himself invented.
Right.
It actually was a minor sect that had, I think, from Seventh-day Adventist. I'm not quite sure of which of the Protestant faiths, but I think it was Seventh-day, that had taken a very strict view, a very literal view of reading what's in the Bible, and it had existed sometime in the 1920s. It is really when they started living in Waco. So it had a long history.
And indeed, that's how Mr. Koresh got his new name, David, was because that wasn't his birth name or his legal name, but he took on the name of David Koresh because he was the savior that the Davidians, I guess, had a part of their extremely conservative right wing, I would say, even political agenda. And that's, of course, what still resonates today.
Yeah, in terms of what actually happened, there were revelations in terms of that whole part of the Bible. Nobody knows exactly how the fire started, or even for a fact who started the fire, but it certainly is much more consistent with David's background and his belief system that they internally started the fire that ended up bringing on death to children as well as adults.
Right. Well, and also too, I found the visual evidence that this documentary presents it sort of was a cover shot, and it showed 1, 2, 3, 4 fires erupting. And query, how could that have been set by anybody else but who was inside the structure, but them? So to me, that was very compelling evidence. Although I guess, I don't know, could there be another argument that the government, the deep state, all of that stuff somehow that they were able to ignite 4 fires inside the house when they're outside at standoff. So that it convinced me that was what it was. But I tend to be on the government side of this story only because it's so crazy. The activities, the actions, and Koresh and the followers come off as being really unhinged.
Well, I would somewhat agree with that, because I think to a large extent that the government had opportunities to really resolve this in a more peaceful fashion.
I agree with that, because it was clearly a to be generous, it was a misalignment of the ATF, which were the first ones on duty, and the FBI. ATF took the approach of negotiating, and then the FBI came in with their guns blazing. That's essentially what happened. So it was government not working at its best. That's for sure.
Well, that, and you also have the incident where the negotiator from ATF was able to get a handful of kids out, and a couple of adults, including the one woman who's interviewed pretty extensively throughout the 3 parts of the series. And the fact that once she was voluntarily left to take care of her own kid, instead of being allowed to do that, she's immediately imprisoned. Yep. And at that point, it became virtually impossible for the ATF negotiators to have any credibility because of what happened on that.
Totally.
And I think that was the real turning point.
Yes.
In terms of this going into a real the calamity that occurred. The tragedy.
Any credibility the negotiators had was totally ripped away from them. And as I say, I don't mean to say I take the government side in terms of what the actions were, because clearly they were big contributors to the, if not the cause of the debacle. But at the same time, if this thing gets postured as big government, deep state versus religious freedom, right? If the group had not stockpiled itself with those cache of weapons, it never would have happened, because ATF wouldn't have been brought in.
An amazing amount of weapons.
Yeah.
Amazing amount of weapons.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what's also, kind of interesting that even though it's supposedly religious freedom, it ends up with the Oklahoma City bombing 2 years later, and how that connects up to the religious issue that David Kokornish was really trying to get across. That really doesn't connect up in my mind, and the fact that it's still so newsworthy is a continuation more of the thought pattern that was in the Oklahoma City bomber mind, as opposed to what really is the religious views of the Branch Davidians.
I think the danger, though, and I think this is probably fed by the media as well, but I think the danger here is that, and again, January 6th was not fueled by religious. It was a political event. It wasn't a religious freedom. But whether or not, because the divisions of our country are deeply political and they're also deeply religious, and whether or not, from whatever motive, that this kind of event could happen again, I think it is kind of media fueled and is a little bit. That doesn't resonate with me as a can it happen again scenario.
Well, you really wonder how much has really been learned. I mean, the documentary doesn't go into Janet Reno and the fact that she testified afterwards that she was lied to, that she felt she was lied to by the FBI director in terms of what she authorized, that it was what she thought she was authorizing and what they were doing and planning to do was two different things. So the political nature of all this, has not diminished one iota.
Right, and this was also very during the time it was happening. I had later a partner and associate at the time, whose brother was Reno's right-hand man. And so there was, again, sort of on the party line of the government's party line, he was giving me that kind of a viewpoint, but clearly there was a lot of CYA going on, certainly after, and I think Reno's interview kind of it was a part of that too.
Yeah, but it also is interesting too. I mean, of the 9 survivors, you have one of them, a fellow named David Thurberdo. Yeah. And you end up with interviews with his mother and her reaction to what was going down, and the fact that there was a refusal to even let family members try to talk to the people in the house to try to see if you can do it, get them out. It was strictly our way or the highway kind of approach.
Right. Right. I think the mindset was that you don't let the civilians in, we're the professionals. I mean, that kind of mindset is legion, but I think that's what was going on. Right.
And I think that also, I think that's one of the reasons why I think I view this documentary very favorable, is that you had such a wide spectrum of viewpoints, because clearly although the mother had no religious interest, she just was wanting her son to survive. And he turned out to be one of the very few that did. And at the same time, you have the sharpshooter from the FBI talking about the fact that if he had, kind of implying that he had at one point an opportunity a few days prior to the fire occurring to actually have killed David. Because David was having to be standing by a window, and you really get the feeling that he had some real doubts about his decision not to fire, and given his overall attitude, it's actually a lot of ways surprising, at least the way the documentary presents this guy, that he did not take the shot.
Right. Right. Yeah, I found that puzzling also. And I guess both critical reviews. I mean, what do they expect? I think besides what happened, kind of names, dates, and places, and the interviews, it's still, I think, a mystery. There's a lot of mystery still surrounding why that had to happen. I mean, we know micro analysis. We know, the ATF and FBI dissonance, the fact that Koresh had a pretty crazy message to tell his, followers, and apparently was able to talk them into stay here while I light the fires. I mean, that's pretty mad.
Well, it is, but also the woman who decided to leave in order to take care of her child. I mean, she talks about having sex with him, and that the fact that she viewed herself as having sex with God. I
Right.
mean, it really wasn't sex, and somehow she was getting a teaching
Yeah.
lesson. I
Yeah.
mean, that her whole viewpoint I found from
Crazy. Yeah.
yeah, well, bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, but that I don't come from that kind of a religious background, and so
I don't think many
I,
people do. Just
yeah,
saying. And I think also too, though, in on the other side of energizing the more liberal of us, the child abuse button, which is apparently true, nobody's disputing that, is enough to get people, on I don't care how you clean it up, let the government do its job mindset, and to dismiss and low key the contributions that the government had to the ultimate tragedy.
yeah. But even the initial incident where the four ATF men were killed. I mean, they went ahead knowing there was no longer. They initially planned it because and they thought would be surprising them. They would not be able to. They would be able to kind of storm the house, given the numbers that they were coming.
Right.
But it wasn't a surprise because the word had leaked out, and somebody had called the house and told them they're on their way. And then the ATF people, at least some of them, knew that it was no longer a surprise, and they said, "Go ahead." And yet, they already had information about there being quite a bit of weapons. I don't think they had any idea just how much. I mean, it is incredible, the amount of ammunition and guns, and the quality of the rifles and so forth that were there.
Yeah. Also, too, I mean, I am, by my background and I guess political orientation, am prepared to not only criticize but also find that the government was out of control on this one, because again,
Yes.
all we have to do is look from Vietnam. I mean, the more recent history from Vietnam to Iraq to know that our government wields power sometimes very irresponsibly. So I think that's a given in this story.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's so many different points where it really could have had a different ending.
Yeah.
Though I think the truly tragic part of it turned when it ends up being on the religious group itself, which is really odd given what led up to it.
Yeah.
They had various points where it could have been resolved, and he could have gotten his message out there. I'm not really sure just how much his story was being told concurrently, because I really don't remember that at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But because so much was just dominated by the mere fact of the shooting, and that just kept being retold and retold.
Well, also too, I think what's interesting in this cottage industry surrounding Waco, that there is April, I guess, 15th or 16th, Showtime's rolling out yet another dramatic, this one is called Waco, The Aftermath, based on an original 2018 piece, I think just called Waco, featuring actors like Michael Shannon. Steve, you and I both, I think, took a taste of that 2018, which is still available on streaming, and we're not that impressed.
Right. I saw very little of it, so I'm a little bit reluctant to say a lot, because I could have been just bad timing, but the little bit I saw, it didn't make me want to see more. That's for sure.
Yeah, no,
And the aftermath could, if they're talking about what led to the Oklahoma City bombing, that could be interesting.
It could be interesting, and Shannon is one of my favorite actors. He started out in the biz on Groundhog Days. He's an actor in Groundhog Day, but he came to my attention in Boardwalk Empire, the series 2010 to 2014.
Yeah, that was a good series.
Yeah, and I saw him in his Broadway debut in a film I filmed in a play called Grace, which was 2006. He's a remarkable actor, and I think just for that piece alone, we plan to watch that Showtime piece and hope for some perspective that maybe the critics who are not happy with the documentary's cursory treatment and spectacular making of the film we might be able, again, it's a drama, it's a TV series. Good luck with getting any deep insight, but anything's possible.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have a part 2 talking about Waco, the aftermath.
There you go.
In terms of the next step.
We've set the preview up.
There's actually an actual book called Waco that just came out that I saw being interviewed, the author being interviewed on C-SPAN on over the weekend, where they do all those book interviews. And the book seems to, he interviewed many of the majority of the 9 people that walked out alive from that final fire. Mm-hmm. But he makes the same point that I think the movie does, that both sides are still in their separate corners.
Yep.
And that's just not going to change.
Yep. And our current divisiveness continues apace.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So if you had to give this in terms of 1 to 10,
I'd say 8.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, maybe 8.5. Yeah. I agree. Well, thank you very, very much for the discussion.
Thank you, Steve, for the invite. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.